Baroness Grey-Thompson is one of the UK's most successful sportswomen and a television presenter. As a wheelchair racer, she won 16 Paralympic medals, including 11 golds, and held over 30 world records and won the London Marathon 6 times between 1992 and 2002. Since 2010, Grey-Thompson has served as a life peer in the House of Lords, sitting as a crossbencher. Tanni, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for watching tonight in what are these slightly strange times, which I think are going to continue for quite a bit longer. So I just want to say I'm delighted, happy to answer questions on absolutely anything about my career, whether it's sport or politics. But I just wanted to start with a kind of a short introduction on sort of some of the things that I'm working on right now and around COVID and the pandemic. So I've always been interested in disability rights, and that's been a big part of my work. But what the pandemic has brought into stark sort of highlight is the challenges that disabled people face in society. And there's a lot of them, to be honest. At the start of lockdown, thousands of compulsory do not resuscitate orders were sent out to disabled people with no underlying health conditions. They were told that if they got COVID, they wouldn't be taken into hospital, they wouldn't be treated. They didn't even have the option of a medic deciding whether they had a ventilator or not. They were told they would just remain at home. And then through the pandemic, we now know through ONS that around 60% of the people who've died from COVID are disabled people. And there's been some positives that have come out of the pandemic in terms of we can all do things online in a way that we never dreamt we could before. Did I ever think the House of Lords would go online? Well, in an institution that's not changed much in 600 years, within a space of a matter of weeks, we're both doing debates and voting online. So there have been positive things that have come out of that. But for disabled people, the challenges of shielding, being part of society and being forgotten are still there. So, and actually the wider implications of COVID on our work in the Lords has been challenging because we're doing things in a very different way. Although most of that is positive, our ability to speak and check and challenge government has changed quite a lot in terms of we have to put our names on lists and we have a limit on the number of people who can speak in debates, which we never used to have. And from sometimes when I've been in the chamber for 10, 11 hours, and what you never want to hear at 11 o'clock at night is a colleague saying, "My Lords, I just rise briefly," because that usually means it's 20 minutes. Actually, the pandemic has a big impact on our ability to check and challenge. And as we go into another lockdown, there are some things that I am concerned about. But looking forward, a lot of my work is going to be around, again, disability rights, employment gap, ensuring that we try and find a way out of the challenging times we are. The other area that I'm involved in is physical activity. And I wrote to the Prime Minister last weekend asking him to look again at keeping gyms and leisure provision open in terms of it being part of community health and looking at our long-term health of a nation. Haven't yet had an official answer on that. But as a nation, we talk about loving sport. We actually quite like watching sport. As a nation, we're not as active as we need to be. And in the first lockdown, physical activity amongst people dropped by 70%, which has an impact on young people, impact women, any protected characteristic, just anybody has a problem for. So the other thing I'm working on is how we get our nation to be more active. So pretty weighty stuff, but that's actually my job and what I'm working on at the moment. So I'm going to hand back and say thank you for just letting me give you a bit of an update on what I'm working on at the moment, and really looking forward to this evening.
Yeah, so first, you've cited the horrific figure of 60% of people who have died being disabled. What would you see as a solution to this as we go into the second lockdown, or is it a potential way to alleviate the issue?
Well, I think in all honesty, the government is making really difficult decisions in terms of what they're trying to do. They're trying to protect the economy, and that sort of influenced decisions on opening back up and easing lockdown. I mean, it's really easy to say, I think, at the point that Spain and Italy and France were going into lockdown, I think that's when the UK should have gone into lockdown. I think the UK should have stopped international flights and looked at how many people were still able to cross the border. There's lots of very practical things. I think some of it is about people understanding about the responsibility of mixing and how much contact they have with other people. And I think that has been a challenge for a lot of people as we go into different rules with the different home countries and different parts of the UK. I don't think it makes it any easier for people to understand what their bubble is and what they're meant to be doing. Some of the challenges around disabled people was getting access to food and shielding and not or people making the assumption, because I'm disabled, that I must be shielded, and actually there's no reason for me to shield whatsoever. So I think as we go into the second lockdown, I hope it's a wake-up call for a lot of people to think they have to change their behaviour. They have to really seriously think about where they go, who they mix with, washing their hands, wiping their face. Actually, I'd add activity to that as well, because this is not going to go away anytime soon. It really isn't. And I think some of what we're hearing, if it's a month, it may be a month, it may be 2 months, I don't know. I mean, I think some of the scare tactics that may have been used around students, you won't be able to go home for Christmas. I think that's been done to try and get students to behave. But the vaccine, whatever we hear, I don't think the vaccine is that close either. It may be next year. So I hope it will, where we are now, will just get people to think about their behaviour, because if they don't, the numbers, the R rate will just continue to spike upwards.
Yeah. You also mentioned the ability to check and challenge policies and legislation. So what are you most concerned about when it comes to having Parliament online?
So the role of the Lords is really quite simple. We're there to say to the government of the day, are you really sure this is what you want to do? So we have rules about how many times we can send things back. So previously, if we were amending legislation, there's a process for putting your name down for amendment. But then when those amendments were discussed, anybody could go into the chamber at any point and raise an issue. Now what we have to do, you have to put your name down either 24 or 48 hours in advance. The dialing in process is being handled amazingly well, but you can't, in the same way that you used to, maybe listen to a debate that was going on. If you're in your office, they're called TV screens, but they're TVs, we call them enunciators. You listen on the enunciator and you think, oh, hang on a minute, I'm going to drop into this debate because I've got something valid to say. It's that's changed. So in terms of your planning, so I'm pretty paperless in the building, but having to plan in a very different way is quite difficult. And then things like second reading, which is basically you say what you like or don't like about a bill. Again, previously, if you put your name down, the amount of time available would just be divvied up by the number of people who wanted to speak. Now we have some maximum limits on the number of people who are able to speak. And so we're balloted to go into a second reading debate. So some of those things are very different from, and I'd say that the Whip's office and what we call usual channels have been pretty good at making sure there's a balance of opinions, but it could be that at some point we slip into a process where the people who may be challenging government aren't allowed to speak in a debate or can't put their name forward or, don't come out the ballot. So I think we just have to be really careful in terms of not using this period of time to reduce our ability to ask the government questions. I mean, the other thing, we have question time every day in the chamber. So there's bits of that I don't particularly like because we bob. And so, everyone stands up and we're self-regulating. So the chamber figures out if it's sport, I'll be higher up the list of people who'll look and go, oh yeah, Grey-Thompson. Now, again, we have to go through a ballot. And because there's less contact between the ministers and the officials, they like us to submit our question ahead of time, where previously we never did that. It's the job of the minister just to be at this dispatch box and answer whatever they're asked. So there are those things that are just different. They're okay if they're there for a period of time, but I wouldn't want to end up in a position where any minister, is only able to answer a question because we've sent it in an hour ahead of time. They should be able to, if you accept being a minister, you should know your brief and you should be able to answer everything, or or at least say I'll write to you, which means in our language I'm not sure the answer, but I'll get it to you. So it's the long-term implication of those. If those things aren't dialed back when we go back into a normal sitting, then I think actually the vast majority of the people of the House of Lords will be concerned about it.
But do you think these will have practical impacts on the actual legislation that's being passed through?
The practical impact is that actually being present in the building is something that is quite important. So the bit I miss is not the papers or the amendments, it's actually bumping into people where you're working on something and you see someone in the corridor and you go, I need to speak to you about this, or I need your advice, or can you connect me to, or, you know, what do I do? And it's missing out on that. I think that's had quite a big impact on what we're all able to do in different ways. And also in terms of, you know, I always say that I should be able to explain in 5 sentences why I voted a certain way. And that if I don't understand the amendment or I don't have a strong opinion on it, I shouldn't vote. And I do spend a lot of time, you know, and we don't always know that votes are coming. But you look at the amendments, you read them, you try and make a call on what you think is the right thing to do. And in normal times, part of that presenteeism in the building is chatting to people about what do you think of this, you know, and what's I think fascinating about the Lords, you can speak to people that you know very well, or you think you agree with, or you can speak to people you don't agree with and ask their opinion, and you can, in a very positive way, ask other colleagues, you know, well, why do you think that? Why do you think we need to do this? And, you know, can you help me? So that's something that I think becomes harder, because now we have a vote and we have an app on our phone, and there's lots of stages of authentication to make sure, you know, that it's me that's voting. But you don't have those conversations around legislation that you would normally do. And I would say previously, there's quite a lot you can do over a cup of tea in the House of Lords, you know, which is, you know, we have this amazing institution, which I call Long Table, so which is for lunch, afternoon tea and supper. And you have to take the next free seat. And when I first went there, I was like, I haven't got time for this. But actually, it makes you speak to people you don't know, or makes me speak to people that I would not necessarily have a conversation with. And that's where you learn a lot of information about what's going on, who's doing what, you know, what the government are doing, what the opposition. And it's not gossip, but chatter sometimes. But that's a really interesting way to find out things that are going on, or to increase your knowledge. So I think it's those things that I really miss out on, because now you get, you know, the division bell rings on my phone, and you miss out on those conversations, and we have a number of minutes to vote, 10 minutes, and I'd say voting, always took it seriously. I take voting really, really seriously now, because you don't have those conversations to check and challenge your own opinion.
And do you think that's particularly important for you as a crossbencher, or do you think everyone's having the same experience?
I think it's different for different people. I think as crossbench, you know, as a crossbench group, we don't really have a lot in common apart from we're crossbenchers. So, you know, politically, we go from one end of the spectrum to the other. I mean, what's fascinating as well is that on certain subjects, I'll completely agree with the government, and then other subjects, I'll completely disagree with the government. So, and what is interesting, when there's maybe some legislation where there's a group of people that you go, yeah, I'm with you on that. And then another thing comes up and you go, oh, no, I do not agree with you. That's always fascinating. I mean, there's a few times I've stood in one of the lobbies and gone, really? Okay, I agree. So that's always sort of interesting in terms of, you know, that pushback. But, you know, as crossbenchers, we don't get a whip. We don't get advised on how to vote. The party peers have an advisory. And again, back to the conversations, you know, it's interesting. Sometimes you know ahead of time if amendment's going to be voted on, partly by whose name is on it or what they've said in previous debates. And that's always useful to say, okay, well, you know, what's the party line? You know, what's the opposition line? What's the Lib Dem line? Are you going to have a 3-line whip or a 2-line whip? Or, you know, it's useful to pick up on some of that information. But the thing I love about being a crossbencher is that nobody tells me how to vote. I would really, really struggle being advised. You're not told, you're advised. I'd really struggle being advised how to vote. So for me, I've always been interested in politics. I have strong views on lots of things, but the party politics, I would struggle to join a party because my views are very subject-based rather than political. So I jump around on things. So for me, having the opportunity to be a crossbencher is really interesting. I couldn't have gone in as party appointee. And as an MP, it's very difficult to be an independent within the system. You know, you need some of that party support behind you. So I really like the fact that I have to think about which way I vote.
So I know that some disabled people, or really just people generally at risk, are able to join their universities or schools in person because they're shielding from the virus. If they're getting different quality of education because of these policies, would it be fair to say this is a form of discrimination?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. So, so my daughter's just started at university. She's, you know, moved into student accommodation. Everything she's doing is online. She hasn't even been to a department yet. She nearly got to go to a department, and then someone in her block got a positive COVID test, so she had to isolate. So she didn't quite get that far. She's had a test, and luckily she's okay. So I think the student experience is going to be really different. I think for those in second year and beyond, if you've had a face-to-face experience, then I think in some ways that may have been slightly easier than if you were in your first year now, because you've got your friendship groups and you've got connections. I think for the first years, it's a challenge to do it. And the big debate, you know, should students defer, should they not? I mean, we had this debate in our own home about what Karis should do, and she chose to go. But I think what we've got to be really careful is that every student gets a good experience. And there's an argument that once you get to university, that, you know, you have a level of academic achievement behind you, you should be quite motivated, you should be able to, you know, crack on with things. But I think that lack of face-to-face, you know, it is not the same in a tutorial doing it through a computer screen as it is doing it face-to-face in terms of body language and all the other things that you have to pick up on. So coming back to your question, I wouldn't say it's discrimination for disabled people. I think we just have to be really careful that students have the most positive experience they can and feel able to learn and get access to, you know, everything that they need to. And that's hard. You know, it's hard for tutors. It's hard for everybody at the moment to get. I mean, it might be interesting if you took a straw poll across the universities across the whole UK, what the first year results are compared to what they're normally like. You know, maybe there might be a bit more studying going on in some places than usual. But I think this is going to be a really tough time. I feel so. My daughter had her A levels cancelled. I feel a lot of sympathy for the next group of students coming through, in terms of what grades are what the exams are going to look like, what they're going to mark them up. You know, I think that's going to be hard, and then that will have another impact on university students. You know, in terms of the grades that the young people get.
Well, sorry, we're reaching kind of a milestone of 25 and 10 years in terms of equality rights. But there's still quite a lot we can do. And I was wondering what you consider to be the next step in that.
So when the Disability Discrimination Act came out 25 years ago, I was one of the people who said we need an Equality Act, because we had lots of other legislation for protected characteristics, and the disability one came late and was a process of what could get through at the time. And, you know, the Lord Morris who pushed, and Jack Ashley, Lord Ashley, who pushed very hard for the legislation. You know, it was a compromise. It's not what a lot of disability rights campaigners wanted. I mean, it was amazing. So I was very interested in disability politics back then, but not actively involved, and watching the news and watching disabled people protesting on the streets, and actually considering public transport was really inaccessible back then. I mean, it's not great now. Actually, how hard it was for people to get to London to protest, you know, and chain themselves to Parliament. And there's one clip, which I love, actually. It's two police officers who've picked up a wheelchair user and is carrying him down the street. And the reason I love it is because they picked him up and carried him, not pushed him. There is nothing worse than, you know, a wheelchair user who doesn't need to be pushed, have someone pushing them. And I've had that happen a few times. It's just, I hate it. So, you know, the DDA was compromised, but actually, hindsight, the Equality Act hasn't helped us. And the outgoing chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission has recently said, you know, disabled people have been done a disservice by the Equality Act, because disabled people have been forgotten amongst that. So, and then, you know, legal aid legislation's had an impact. You know, a lot of the rights that disabled people have won have come about because they were able to sue organisations. I mean, it's not the way to bring about change. I don't think it, but actually that's the last resort. And the Equality Act has made some of that harder. So, you know, the disappointing thing with the DDA, we were told in the mid-90s that on January the 1st this year, trains would be step-free. It's not even close. And in January this year, I was told I needed to be a bit more patient and probably wait another 30 years. So, you know, my aspiration and waiting for this moment, you know, I don't know, might not be around in 30 years. You know, actually all I want is the same miserable experience of getting on a train as everyone else. And I don't have that. I have to book 24 hours in advance. I have to turn up at the station if it's manned. I have to kind of say, is it okay if I get in the train? You know, it's like, and then there's no guarantee I'll get off the train at the other end, and there's absolutely no guarantee that the toilet will work. And there's a group of us, we previously, you know, I commute a lot. I live in the northeast and work in London, so I do drive, but I use the train a lot because it's easier. And you know, there's a group of us that tweet a lot about our train experiences. And there's one train company that actually had done some fairly good work on step-free access, but what they'd done in the train carriage is that where the wheelchair space was, they'd put the cafe bar at the other end and no way for a wheelchair user to get through. And I tweeted something about, well, how do I get a cup of coffee? And some person from the social media team had sort of tweeted back, well, don't worry, you'll be in sight of the cafe bar. So fairly sarcastically, I replied back, you know, all my dreams for equality, being inside the cafe bar is it. You know, you can see it, but you can't buy anything. So it's that thing, you're kind of close, but you've missed it. So I think there's something about my age. I've suddenly turned quite grumpy about things. And I think there's a part of, I think it's being a woman and a certain age. And there's a lot where you have to work within the system, and whether you call it compliance or not rocking the boat or whatever you want to call it. I think I've got to the point where now I'm just challenging these things. And I think some of that is also around the pandemic, you know, being, you know, sort of away from other people for a long time. The daily resistance I have to people treating me badly has just gone, because you have to have quite a high level of resistance. So, you know, just before lockdown, I was getting on the tube in the morning and a member of staff came up to me and said it in this tone: you should travel on the tube when it's quieter, because, you know, it's really busy now and people have got important jobs to go to. Okay, so I said, well, again, sort of slightly, you know, probably sarcastically, it was like, yeah, I work in Westminster, I'm going to the Lords, I'm going to defeat the government, I'm going to take over the country, I'm going to become a dictator. And they said, oh, well, that's lovely, but can you travel when it's more quiet? You didn't listen to my answer. You just didn't. And that's where my daily resistance has gone. So, you know, so actually talk about, you know, when I was pregnant, first thing I was offered was a termination. You know, loads of people would stop me in the street and say, people like you shouldn't have children. And my response to that is, what, Welsh people? Oh, you mean disabled? You know, so for me, it's a form of defence. But I think what I'm seeing at the moment is a real issue on disabled people not being listened to. And I mean, it happened this week. I was in work. Somebody, there was a door that was shut. It's quite a heavy door. They asked me, did I need a hand? I said, no, thank you. They said, are you sure? Yeah, I'm sure. I don't need a hand. I'll give you a hand. No, I'm fine. And then they opened the door for me. And it's like, so, okay, were they being nice? Yeah, they were. You know, they were a nice person. But actually, what made them think it's okay to not even vaguely listen to my answer and allow me? I know it's only an opening a door, you know, but it's, if I did that to another woman and said, well, I'm not going to listen to your answer, I'm just going to completely ignore you because you're a woman and you don't have any capacity to make that decision because you're a woman, I'll just do it for you anyway, you know, a colleague will be quite rightly upset. So I know it sounds like I'm having a bit of a rant, and I probably am, but there are some things like that we need to just listen to people. And there's been some funny time, you know, there was a while ago I was in Canary Wharf, and I mean, to be fair, I had a rucksack on my shoulders, one on the back of my chair, a bag on my knee, and I was talking to my husband on my phone, you know, so I was pushing up the road like this, you know, because I was meant to be doing something else. And somebody asked me, did I need a hand? I went, no, I'm fine, thank you. And okay, I probably did look like I was struggling, but then they decided to push me somewhere I didn't want to go. And to get away from them, I pretended I needed to go into this building, which actually ended up being quite a high security building. lovely security officer, and I said, look, I'm really sorry, I was just trying to get away from that person. They thought they were threatening my security and were about to call the police. I went, no, they were just pushing me somewhere I didn't want to go. And then you end up in this really sort of difficult situation. But yeah, that sort of thing where, and then it impacts disabled people, because then disabled people don't have the same aspirations, or may not have the same aspirations. And then it just impacts and impacts and impacts. And sorry, I'm going off on a bit of time, but the other thing, there's two things that I think it's worth students looking at. Inspiration porn, which you can safely Google, which is about the portrayal of disabled people, which is about, we're all meant to be brave and marvellous because we're disabled. And it's hard, because being an ex-athlete, there are moments in an athlete's life that may be inspirational, and that's fine, because that's the sporting context. But just because I got out of bed in the morning, I'm not an inspiration. And there are other people who really struggle to get out of bed in the morning, and that's a big deal for them. But don't just make an assumption that we're inspirational just because we're disabled. The other one is disability rights campaigners called Cripping Up, where a non-disabled actor plays a disabled character. And for a really long time, quite rightly, blacking up has just been considered appalling, just not. But Cripping Up wins you an Oscar. You are so much more likely to win an Oscar if you're a non-disabled actor playing a disabled character. And it's always sort of wrapped up in heartwarming and lovely and inspirational. And it's like, oh, yuck. So I'm slightly kind of over all that stuff as well. It's not possible every single opportunity for a disabled person, but actually, if non-disabled people steal all the roles, then there's no place for disabled people. And disabled people should be, there's a whole issue on representation, but disabled people should just be represented far wider in the media than they currently are. And my final rant is that, I've said this in sport, sticking me in a picture doesn't make it diverse or inclusive or equal. And I'm over that as well. It's just, if we're going to talk genuinely about diversity, equality and inclusion, we have to do it in a really forward-looking way, not just, having a picture and going, that's okay. We've got to talk about it more seriously than we ever have done before. That was a very long answer. Apologies.
No, I think a lot of it comes down to, and maybe I'm wrong, but there is a lack of education. Do you think these sorts of topics should be talked about in school?
Yes, I do. And Scope did some research a little while ago, which said, a huge number of non-disabled people are very worried, concerned, frightened to talk to a disabled person. So, going up to a disabled person and saying, so what's wrong with you then? It's not a good opener. And some people may not want to talk about their impairments or how it affects their daily life, because actually a lot of this stuff can be quite traumatic to explain or talk about. But I think when disability is seen as so inherently negative, so I've had people who've come up to me and said, if I was like you, I'd have killed myself years ago. Right, so I got to be an athlete, I got to travel the world, I got to compete at 5 Paralympics, 4 Olympics, I did demonstration races at the Olympics, and I'm now a politician, and you think my life is tragic. Wow, okay. So there's lots of very complicated things. And this is a very tricky one, because, the UK government has just passed legislation for Northern Ireland around abortion. And I absolutely support abortion and a woman's right to choose. And there are many, many reasons why a woman might report a pregnancy very late on. But I think it needs to be done in a slightly different way. But the legislation that's just been passed has allowed people, fetuses with impairments less than mine, to be terminated up till full term. Now the message so there's parts of that's, I don't have a difficulty with. But actually what it means is that the message that goes out is that disabled people should be eradicated from society, and that we have no life, and that we're better off dead, and that there's no positive place for us to be. So abortion's always a really tricky one, but it just doesn't help right now in terms of the attitude towards disabled people. And then when you start talking about COVID and access to ventilators and medics having to make unbelievably difficult decisions about potentially who gets a ventilator or not, what is being played into that decision? If a disabled person's refused a ventilator just because they're disabled, what else are they taking into account in terms of, the ethics of that is unbelievably difficult. But what information is being taken into account in terms of contribution to society? Don't just assume that because you're disabled, you have no contribution to make whatsoever. But that's I wouldn't want to be a doctor on a COVID ward or any hospital ward right now in terms of the decisions they have to take.
You've talked a bit about inspiration porn, and I read in one of your interviews that someone asked you what drives you, and you said proving myself, but not because of my disability. Could you kind of expand on that a bit? Because I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of things. So I'm naturally a very competitive person. I'm quite strong-willed. I have views on things. I have a view on everything. Absolutely everything. But actually most of those views shouldn't be public. So it's that kind of balance. But I think there's an element of proving to my parents. My parents were incredible in terms of getting me into mainstream education at a point when disabled children didn't have access to mainstream education. I think it's the personality that I am. I would have had this whether I was disabled or not. There's no doubt that being a wheelchair user has had some impact on that. But when I was very young, we weren't quite sure the impact my impairment was going to have, because I could walk a little bit. So, it wasn't about proving that I could do it as a wheelchair user. It was just about proving that I could do so. The reason my parents got me to do sport was I was apparently a very annoying child. Who'd have believed it? And they thought it might calm me down and tire me out a bit. So that thing in me to drive me forward has always been there. And it's hard because I can't completely differentiate my personality from being a wheelchair user, because it does have an impact. But I feel the need to kind of prove stuff because I'm me, not because I'm also Welsh and I'm a mum and I'm a wife and I'm a parliamentarian or a politician. I like to think of myself as a parliamentarian, not a politician, but that probably makes me a politician. So it's all those things that come together in terms of me, driving me forward to do the things that I want to do.
And do you think that's where your two careers kind of overlap, in that area of being very determined?
I think so, because in sport you have to have quite a lot of resilience to either deal with the system around you, or to train when it's cold and miserable, or when you're injured, or when you're not improving, and you need that resilience to come back and train every single day or twice a day. We're training 50 weeks of the year. This is the decision female athletes have to take, that I planned the birth of my daughter. Male athletes don't even vaguely have to think about anything like that. I've got friends who competed at elite level who've never had children because it didn't fit into their schedule, or the number of women who halfway through a cycle, it's like, I have to have a child now. And so the birth of my daughter was, I had to have a baby early in 2002 to be ready to compete at Athens in 2004. So there's all these sort of different things. The resilience matters, and actually in politics it's fairly similar. You have to be quite resilient, quite determined. If you're not winning votes, if you're not changing the government's view on things, you need a level of resilience that makes you go back and keeps trying to do these things. But for me, sport was really good training ground for that, because I think in sport you're constantly trying to improve, and you're used to asking people around you for help, and what do I need to do to be better. And politics is a bit like that, really. I always think if you've come from business or academia, or where you're the absolute world leading expert in something, it's quite hard to ask for help, or it's quite hard to ask for help on process, or why do we do something a certain way, or we have rules for what colour carpets guests can stand still on. So it's like some of those things, it can be quite hard. But from an athlete's point of view, you're used to just saying, you're used to checking and challenging. So I think my personality has helped with both of the, and there's no doubt my family have been amazingly supportive in terms of allowing me to do both those things in my life. I couldn't have done it without them. So you need an element of that, whatever you're going to do in this, whatever this new world is. Everyone's going to need a little bit more resilience than they had before.
Yeah. You mentioned Athens, and I know that Athens was a bit tumultuous for you. Do you think the fact you had your daughter, whether psychologically or physically, impacted you during those games?
Yes, I mean, I was one of those people that said having a baby is not going to change my life. That's because I've never had one, I never really held one, and then suddenly you've got this little thing that doesn't perform to order, and she didn't sleep, and I just remember being just exhausted. But on the other side of it, then, you know, if you've got to feed a baby every 3 hours, you've got to be really focused in terms of your training and doing the things that you need to do. So you can't look out the window and say, oh, I'll leave it another half an hour for the rain to clear. It's like, I have to train now. So it did make me think what on earth I did with my life before. I must have just messed around a lot. So it sort of came with swings and roundabouts. It definitely, you know, training and traveling was harder. But then, you know, she had an amazing opportunity. She traveled the world with us. I mean, to be fair, she thought the long jump pit at a track was the beach. You know, she got to just, I mean, the other thing about sport is I remember taking her to races in Switzerland, and just loads of Swiss athletes kind of, or partners of Swiss athletes going, I'll look after your baby for an hour, you know, and you know that she's safe and she's fine, or she's playing with the other kids of athletes, you know. So, you know, there's lots of things. I mean, I think when she was little, I think she thought that every child went to the Olympics and Paralympics. So, you know, she went to Athens, and then we took her to the Beijing Olympics and Paralympics, and she came back. So she was 6 then, and she came back and she wrote an essay for school, which just said, in the summer, Mummy made me go to the Olympics, and we watched some boy called Tom do some diving. Go, yeah, Tom Daly. Yeah. And now, I mean, now she's like, I can't believe I did. So, it was hard. And I think the hardest bit was people's expectations. So I did have a team manager say to me, becoming a mother will make you soft. I go, well, not really. And so actually, I think I said to him, let me stick a bowling ball inside you, slash it out with a knife, and see if you're training 2 weeks later. But, you know, it just made me rethink priorities and rethink, and it did have an impact on my retirement, and just in a positive way. You know, it made me realize I wanted to do other things. So, but it's hard, but there's still the expectation on women, I think, is quite hard, you know, in terms of what you're expected to do and how you're meant to kind of fit in your working life around. You know, there's still an expectation. I'd hope this had moved on a bit. You know, the women have most of the childcare responsibilities. And actually, you know, my husband changed career, actually twice. So once when we had our daughter, so that I could carry on competing, and then he changed his career again when I went into politics. So I mean, he's amazing, but actually that should just be, you know, a little bit more the norm. It's sadly it's maybe not as much a norm for women as it should be.
Yeah, definitely. One thing that struck me when I researched you and read all your books is the camaraderie you had between you and your competitors, and I was wondering if that's something that you think was unique to you, or something that's prevalent in all sport.
I think it happens across all sport. I mean, you're not all best mates with each other, but you do find sort of friends that you have on the team, or, you know, either your team or other teams. And, you know, you can travel a lot together. I mean, the great thing is, you know, you might be traveling to a competition on your own, but when you get there, you know lots of people. So the one thing I learned as a young athlete is who you share a room with at a major games is really important. Whether you get on with them or not, that is really, really, really important. You know, so when an athlete, Nicola, I shared a room with at 2 Paralympics, you know, it makes a massive, it can have a hugely positive or negative effect on your career if you don't get the base. And people don't think about those things. They think about the competition, the food and all, but actually it's some of the basic stuff that you need to get right. And yeah, there's some athletes I'm still, you know, in touch with, which is great. Or, you know, I still go to a lot of events, and you bump into some, you might not have seen them for a year, but you just drop back into where it was the last time you left them. You end up reminiscing a bit about the old days, which is always a bit dangerous. But it's that there's a lot of, you know, just really nice people in sport. I mean, and there's people you don't talk to, but I think I was very lucky that I've, you know, developed some really strong friendships in sport that are still there to this day.
And what do you think was the hardest and best part of racing? I'm sure you get that asked that quite often.
Hardest, winter training. And we used to go away. I mean, we used to spend some time abroad in sunnier climes, but how long winter training goes on for. I mean, it's only like 3-4 months. and that's where it's hard. You're doing lots of miles, lots in the gym, you're kind of tired, you just kind of eat, sleep, train. Going out when it's 2 degrees is not a lot of fun. You're not going through the door going yay, but you kind of know you have to do it, and then you can be quite smug when you come in because you've done it. So I think that's the hardest bit. I mean, sometimes some of it's the pressure. So I certainly felt this going into my last games, Athens. I felt huge pressure, and it actually wasn't really for me. But it's about gold medals. Silvers only count when there's a tie for gold, and bronzes only count when there's a tie for silver and gold. So golds are the ones that matter. And I was expected to win 2 golds, a silver and a bronze. I won 2 golds, so better that than a silver and a bronze. But I kind of knew that was my last games. And so I think the pressure I felt was, I'm not going to do this at Paralympics again. So it's a bit sad. And you're thinking about what, I planned my retirement from quite a long way out, but you're kind of thinking, what's next? What am I going to do? So yeah, the pressures sometimes. But then sometimes the pressure's really, when people expect you to do well, the pressure can be that. It's the yin and yang end of it as well. The best bit when you nail a race and you, and I did, 400 was one of my distances, and it's the track, it's which way the wind's blowing. There's lots of things that impact it, and for us we used to split it into 50-meter segments, and ideally what you want, or what suited me as an athlete, was a tailwind on the back straight. And when you just nail all those different segments, it's amazing. And I would say I've done it really twice in my career, and both times I broke the world record. One was in Gothenburg and one was in Zurich, and you come off the track just going, I couldn't, on that day in those conditions, I couldn't have done better. And one of them was funny. It was we're at Swiss Nationals. My husband was my coach, and the squad were there, and I came off the track, world record, and this is 6 months after having our baby, and Ian hadn't seen the clock, and he looked at me and he said, your first 5 pushes, they were okay, but not for me. And I went, oh, okay, yeah, you're right. I thought they'd been pretty good. And then one of the lads on the team said to Ian, look at the clock. And he went, and Jace said, look at the clock. And I remember Ian looking over the clock, and he went, when he recognised the world record, and he went, your first 5 pushes still needed a bit of work. And you go, but so yeah, nailing a race, it's the most amazing feeling, because you feel like you could do, and then it doesn't happen again for about another 3, many years maybe, but that's an incredible feeling. And winning medals is, there's lots. Winning a medal is great, and then there's a lot waiting around for the medal ceremony and all sorts of things like that, but that's just a moment in time which you probably, it happens so quickly, the medal ceremony and everything else, that you don't always get to enjoy the moment as much as maybe you'd like to.
Yeah. Well, I think we should move on to audience questions. So please keep submitting your questions using the question answer function, and remember to include your name and college so I can credit you. So first we have Emily from LMH. You've done so many incredible things in your life. What do you think your greatest achievement has been?
The thing that keeps me going is I hope I haven't had it. And that is really difficult. There are races that I've won that I wasn't expected to win. Making the team as a young athlete when, I was sort of, I wasn't, considered a really talented junior. I was considered a good junior, but not sort of talented. It was only quite late on as a junior that people looked at me and saw I had talent. Probably winning the 100 meters in Athens, because I'd completely screwed up my 800 meter race, which was my strongest event, and I won the 100, which was my weakest. I remember being on the warm-up track, and so the short version of this is, to win the 800, I had to go to the front and time trial it. And we'd spent 2 years working on the tactics and the gearing on the chair, and training had been based around that. And that was a 2-year plan. And I went into the race. And as we broke off the bend, I decided to sit at the back of the pack. No idea why. And I thought I'd had a bad start. And actually, when I watched the race back, I hadn't. I misread the race. I was pretty miserable. I came seventh, worst time that season, worst of everything. So coming back and winning the 100 was huge. And I was sick 12 times on the warm-up track. I remember the coach looking after me, just was standing next to me with a bag of ice on my neck saying, I don't want to do this again, coughing up stomach lining, because I was just nervous, scared, worried, didn't want to let people. So winning 100 was cool. And then in politics, don't know, I don't win a lot of votes because actually the stuff that I take to a vote, I normally have a 3-line whip against me. So, there's legislation I've shifted and got people to think differently. It's not the same. You can't say like I've had this many wins, so it's great, because how stuff gets overturned and sent back and forth. But I hope I've had a positive influence on the disability legislation that I work on. But if there's one thing I could change, I would make it illegal to park in a blue badge space without one. And that's not just about the blue badge space, but that's about attitude and about thinking about other people and just being a little bit more caring to each other. So yeah, I kind of, there's quite a few things that I still want to do. So yeah, I hope that I get to the end of whenever my political career is and feel as positive about it as I do about my sporting career.
So we have this from Owen from UNIV, and he wants to know if you have any advice for anyone who wants to be an athlete at university, a professional athlete.
Sure. So, I mean, it's about balancing training and studying. And for you guys, that's a lot of expectation on you to study. But I think work-life balance is really important. I think you've got to think quite carefully. I mean, depending if you're in athletics or whatever sport, it's thinking about your competition structure and balancing that in terms of showing the selectors that you're in the best shape that you can possibly be. And I think it's about learning about it doesn't always go right, and you need to keep coming back. And it's not just training hard. You can train hard. I guess it's a bit like studying. You can study hard, but you need to study and train smart as well. And I think for me, my time at university was really useful in terms of I didn't do much else but train or study. I didn't always get the balance right. But I think education is really important if you want to have a successful career in sport, because you need to understand contracts and you need to understand sponsors and commitment, and you need to understand all those different things. I mean, the only thing I would say is, I say this to younger athletes, is find a sport you really like. Don't start off going, I want to be an Olympian or a Paralympic and I will do any sport that gets me there. And there's a few who are able to do that, but actually find something you really like. Because for me, while sport has been a huge number of the top 10 things in my life, it's also been a huge number of the top worst things in my life, because of the challenges and things that come with it. So you've got to love it, because when you really don't like it, you've got to remember that you love it. That makes you go out and do the winter training or get through injury or do all those different things. And what I think I was good at doing as a young athlete was finding good coaches, but not just, they weren't people who coached a lot of wheelchair racing before, but they were people who wanted to learn and go on the journey and who were kind of critical friends. And they're really, really important people to have in your life. So I'd say the best thing I ever had was either through coaches or training partners, have people who are critical friends who would just say, yeah, that's good, that's not good. But yeah, gotta love it, because there's lots of times where you just think, oh, I don't want to do this. I'd rather just eat a packet of Jaffa cakes. But you can only do that if you've done a training session. And when I say a packet, I mean 12, not the packet of 3. They're just they're not even worth bothering with. So yeah, the best thing is we used to do a training run on Sunday where you could eat a box of 12 Jaffa cakes waiting for your pasta to boil. So, that's why you've got to love it, because you've got to mostly do things that you don't like and are quite hard. The things that you're not good at are the things you don't like doing. So you've got to spend a lot of time working on your weaknesses. So you've got to love it.
Jessie from Merton wants to know whether or not you were happier now as a politician or as an athlete.
Wow.
Tricky one.
Differently happy. I mean, I loved my sporting career and I love my political career. And I'd say mostly to both of those, because you don't love every single moment of it. I'm unbelievably lucky that I found a second career that I really love and I want to keep doing. And some of that was actually, I started planning my second career when I was 21. So I did a politics degree, and I started thinking about other things and building up a CV. And I felt, when I was 21 that, saying you travel the world and met nice people is not really enough to kind of get a proper job afterwards. And I think I was always conscious, my dad, I mean, it was quite funny. He didn't think sport or House of Lords was a proper job. I think, and that comes back to, maybe a little bit about living up to their expectations of me. But what I knew when I retired from sport, I knew absolutely everything I didn't want to do. And that's really important, because I think sometimes in sport, if you've been successful, you get offered loads of opportunities and you kind of do it because you're not sure. So I was able to turn down some, quite, lucrative, if I'm being honest, financial things, because it was like, I don't want to do that. And that really, and I had, I knew I wanted to get involved in politics. Which bit of politics was, actually, my plan really was I was going to do law conversion and become a lawyer. And then I got to be in the Lords, and it's like, okay, it's kind of close to what I always wanted to do. So yeah, I think I'm really lucky. And what I say to young athletes, or in careers, if you're really not liking most of what you do, then find something else. Or whatever if your aspiration is to earn a lot of money, or whatever, then there's whatever job you have, there'll be things you don't like. But you should at least be able to, have 70% of your jobs be something that you mostly enjoy doing. And there's times that are hard and challenging. But yeah, for me, I'm very lucky that I dropped into something as a second career that I enjoy, and I think I can make a difference at, hopefully.
I think we have time for maybe one last question. So this one's anonymous, and they want to know when exactly you knew you wanted to be an athlete.
So I knew I wanted to play sport from the age of 7. I actually thought I wanted to play basketball, but I was completely rubbish at that. I knew that I loved sport, and I was one of those children that was like, I just love doing it and I wanted to be better. I started wheelchair racing at 12. I always thought it was a really boring sport until I did it, because I was like, what's it going to go and like, just go round and round and round. And then I watched the London Marathon on TV, actually, when I was 11, and it was like, wow. And I remember saying to my mum, I'm going to do that one day. And she was like, okay, yeah. And then I started doing wheelchair racing. It was like, actually, it's not boring. I love it. So I knew I wanted to be involved in sport. I think I was probably 19 when I thought, actually, I want to see if I can not make a career necessarily, but if I can do this at a GB level, if I can, make the team, and if I can win medals. So it's quite, I guess, slow in terms of each step. There's a bit of me, I would still love to play basketball. But I can't throw, catch or shoot. And which is a bit of a barrier, really, having no skills for the sport that you want to do. But I think I was lucky that I found wheelchair racing, that I found it. But the one thing, there were lots of things my parents did which were amazing, but my father said to me, you can't just concentrate on one sport, that you have to do other things, because actually you're not always going to have a great time, so you have to jump to. So actually until I was 16, 17, they very strongly encouraged me to play other sports, and I think that's really good. And bizarrely, that's where we're moving back to with young people and performance pathways now. So I think it's good to do a range of things, because it builds up skills and it helps other things. But you know what, it's funny, if I look back to me at 16, did anyone think I was going to make the GB team? Probably. I won junior nationals, my 100 meters, my last year as a junior. Until that point, no one thought I was talented. And then it was funny because everyone goes, oh, you're really talented. Well, you didn't think it for the last sort of 5 years. Anyway, but I think for me, it was lucky I was under the radar for the first few years of my career, that gave me a chance to develop and not have pressure on me in any way. So yeah, it was good. And I still play a lot of sport now. Do you know the hardest bit now is going into the gym? And I used to count the weight stack from the bottom, and now I have to count the weight stack from the top. And that's a bit, but it's okay. I'm 51, it's okay. But I still think, Oh, I should try and do a bit more. But yeah, activity is still really, really important to me. And that helps me, being active helps me with work. So I'm lucky I get to do the two.
Thank you so much, Tanni. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you have too.
Thank you very much. Thank you.